Hello, welcome to Old Virginia Homes. The house we're visiting today was constructed as a memorial to our nation's founding father, George Washington, and it was built by Washington's namesake, George Washington Parke Custis, Martha Washington's grandson. The Greek Revival mansion was deliberately designed to be conspicuous, with an imposing facade that would be a fitting tribute and a proper place to display Custis's George Washington memorabilia, which he referred to as Washington treasures. But the house also became witness to our nation's most painful fracture, and its grounds have become the final resting place of more than 400,000 people who have served and sacrificed since the Revolutionary War. Sometimes fighting side by side in a united front, sometimes facing off against one another as ideals clashed. This house stands high above our nation's capital, built to celebrate the formation of a nation, but now forever tied to the memory of a nation divided. Join me as we visit Arlington House, an old Virginia home in Arlington. Let's go.
The long climb up the hill to Arlington House is completely worth it. After leaving a parking lot full of tourist buses, waiting in lines with other sightseers to get through a security checkpoint, a busy visitor center echoing with kids let out of classrooms, being herded by harried chaperones. Once you leave the visitor center, a startling stillness greets you almost immediately, and you are transported to another world. The cacophony of voices is replaced by birdsong. The crowds thin to nothing as they disperse among the sea of stark white tombstones, little monuments to lives lived loudly and now resting peacefully. There are reminders to be quiet and respectful as you walk among the tidy geometric rows, but I think even the most boorish people are instinctively hushed. Arlington National Cemetery was created as a result of the mass carnage of the Civil War. But before the hundreds of thousands of bodies were buried here, when the country was still relatively new and united in purpose and ideology, this was a plantation. Built between 1802 and 1818 by the enslaved people who supported the estate, Arlington House was the vision of George Washington Parke Custis, the step-grandson of George Washington. The design reflects Custis's reverence for Washington and was influenced by ancient temples that symbolized democracy and civic virtue. The stately portico is supported by massive Doric columns, a style referred to as colossal orders. This is one of the earliest homes in America to incorporate this architectural feature. The structure is made of handmade brick covered with hydraulic cement, which is similar to modern stucco. The surface was then neatly scored and faux finished to resemble marble and sandstone. Custis appointed himself as the keeper of Washington's legacy and advanced a reverential narrative of the founding fathers to promote patriotism and unity among Americans. This house was sort of a shrine, and the rooms inside once held artifacts from the American Revolution, relics that Custis believed would inspire future generations. Originally, the house was to be called Mount Washington, but because Custis thought the first president's name was being used way too often on buildings, before construction was complete, he renamed his house Arlington. Arlington was the name of ancestral Custis homes in England and colonial Virginia. Custis lived at Arlington House with his wife, Mary Lee Fitzhugh Custis, nicknamed Molly, and their only surviving child out of 4, a daughter, Mary Anna Randolph Custis. Molly Custis's views against slavery were put into action. She started a school for the enslaved families at Arlington. She freed her own inherited slaves and was a supporter of the American Colonization Society, which was founded in 1816 and focused on purchasing and freeing slaves, resettling them in Liberia on the west coast of Africa. About 12,000 former slaves were resettled, but many died from disease and malnutrition after resettlement, and the society was ultimately disbanded. George and Molly Custis's daughter, Mariana, would go on to marry her childhood friend and distant cousin, Robert E. Lee. At that time, Lee was a lieutenant in the Army. Molly Custis died in 1853. George Washington Parke Custis died in 1857. And George Washington Parke Custis directed in his will that all 196 of his slaves were to be freed within 5 years, and that no slaves were to be sold to pay off debts. The Lee family, Robert and Mary had 7 children, lived at Arlington House, and it was there that Lee was offered a position of command of the Army, but rejected the position, eventually leading the Army of Northern Virginia in the Confederate States Army during the Civil War. Although Lee did ultimately free Custis's slaves within 5 years, during the 5-year time period, he was accused of harsh treatment, as he worked them very hard and rented some of them out in order to pay off Custis's many debts and improve some of the deteriorating buildings on the property. 3 days before the Emancipation Proclamation took effect, the slaves were freed. Between 1862 and 1863, Congress passed a series of laws for the purpose of forcing landowners in insurrectionary districts to give up their property by levying a tax on the property and forcing the owners to pay that tax in person. This in-person requirement would pretty much guarantee non-compliance, as many owners, including the Lee family, had fled their properties. A tax of $92.07 was levied against the Arlington House plantation. This would have been easily paid. However, Mary Lee, the legal owner, was in Richmond and unable to travel back to pay the tax. She attempted to have payment made by a relative, Philip Fendall, but the tax collectors refused to accept payment from a third party, and Arlington was seized for non-payment of taxes. In January 1864, the property sold at public auction to the United States Army for $26,800. Thousands of Union troops occupied Arlington, fortifying the area around the estate. The mansion became military headquarters, and many officers and their families lived there during the war. Soldiers looted the property, many of them defending the theft and destruction as retribution for Lee's role in the Confederacy. As the war's casualties mounted, the grounds surrounding Arlington House were transformed into a military cemetery. What was once a family estate became hallowed ground. After the war, Mary and Robert E. Lee's eldest son, George Washington Custis Lee, referred to as Custis, successfully petitioned to have Arlington House's ownership transferred back to the Lee family. Custis didn't intend to live there. a house that was now host to thousands of wartime graves, but he wanted just compensation from the United States government. Custis was able to negotiate a sale of the property back to the government for $150,000, granting the government legal title to the mansion and surrounding land. In 1933, Arlington House was turned over to the National Park Service, and in 1955 it was made a national memorial to honor Robert E. Lee. In May 2009, the Save Historic Arlington House organization was established to help with restoration and maintenance, as well as with the preservation of historical memories of both the enslaved and free who lived there. This organization was renamed the Arlington House Foundation. In 2014, a rebirth of Arlington House was made possible with a $13.25 million contribution from philanthropist David Rubenstein. Today, Arlington House stands restored as a place of memory, reflection, and reconciliation. Thank you for visiting Arlington House with me, an old Virginia home.